Hello everyone, this is my Naloxone kit. Inside of it are some rubber gloves or latex gloves and a barrier kit for CPR, as well as two nasal administration units for Naloxone. But what the hell is Naloxone and why do I have this? Well, Naloxone is, I guess, an antidote for opioid overdose. When you take opioids, they go into the, say, intercellular fluid matrix of the brain, and they bind to the opioid receptors and cascade their effects in the body. When there's too many in the body, then the opioid receptors latched on to the axon, I believe, start to shut down so many systems in the body can no longer breathe itself or do other essential physiological processes. What naloxone does is it goes in and it kicks those opioids out of the receptor site, basically stopping overdose very, very, very quickly, but only for a temporary amount of time, 30 to 45 minutes before that person, whoever might be overdosing, begins to overdose again, essentially. But why do I have this kit? Where did it come from? And why should it matter to you? Well, it all sort of floats around this chemical, this pharmaceutical opioid called fentanyl. Fentanyl is an extremely potent drug, up to 100 times more potent than heroin, and fentanyl has found its way into the illicit drug scene as probably a result of a lack of access to Oxycontin. The history of Oxycontin and the rise of opioid dependence in North America is a long and interesting story that is covered in one of the articles linked below. But the presence of fentanyl has basically gone beyond just people buying, say, fentanyl tablets and bootleg fentanyl tablets for fentanyl-specific addiction, and it has started to proliferate its way into the heroin supply and the supply of other opioids, which, again, it's up to 100 times more potent than heroin. If you take a look at this picture here, you get an idea of how much it takes to overdose on heroin compared to how much it takes to overdose on fentanyl. So even the most minuscule presence of fentanyl in an opiate supply could mean an unintentional overdose. So why do I have it? Well, I don't use opioids. No one in my family or in my inner community uses opioids, be it fentanyl or heroin, as far as I know, but I have it because fentanyl is not just being found contaminated in opioids anymore, but it's also being found contaminated into non-opioid drugs, for example, such as cocaine. The presence of it in non-opioid drugs poses a very serious problem because one can't even test for that. I mean, typically you'd use a reagent test, but even a reagent test won't be able to tell you whether or not there's fentanyl contained in your drugs because the amount could be so small. Again, take a look at how little it takes to overdose on fentanyl. Then no matter whether or not you take a little scoop out of your drugs and run it through the reagent test, 3 or 4 different portions of it, you still might miss that one tiny portion that has the presence of fentanyl or carfentanil that can kill you. So it's getting increasingly risky to use recreational drugs, and I think that's really a shame because at the same time, it's getting increasingly more likely that the people using recreational drugs are using them responsibly. Knowing how to use naloxone puts me in a position where I could save a life, and being that I do interact with people who use drugs, and I do go to events where people use drugs, possibly, responsibly and with all the proper harm reduction tactics taken into play, that people, even with all of that, could still be at risk of being their drug supply being contaminated with fentanyl and an overdose resulting from that, and possibly a death. So I have a naloxone kit because I went to a naloxone training, which was free here in Kitchener, Ontario, where I live, and I was given this kit so that I could have it on hand if I ever happened to come into contact or come into an event where an opioid overdose is happening, and that is increasingly more likely a possibility So the point here is not me saying don't do drugs, because I think telling you just not to do drugs because it's dangerous is no better than me telling you not to have sex because you might catch an STI. But what I am saying is you need to get increasingly more careful about what you do. If you can, go learn how to administer naloxone and get yourself a fancy little kit. Just clip it on the side of your backpack. I mean, it's cool. I think it's trendy. You can just hang it on the outside, let people know that you give a shit and that you're ready to save a life. Or just learn more about what's going on in your community insofar as fentanyl or carfentanil or the opioid crisis. Furthermore, you could familiarize yourself as much as possible with the harm reduction practices around whatever drugs that you're choosing to use. And I want to just suggest to you that if you get offered drugs at a party and everything's like going really good and things are fun, or you're at a club or whatever, and you don't know where it's coming from except that it's your friend and it's just a powder in a bag, just to really reflect on what you're willing to risk for that high. So thank you very much for taking this time to listen to this little public service announcement, and thank you very much for taking the time and making the effort to becoming someone in your community that can save a life. Take care.